is accomplished, and now with the energy audits and stuff that we saw, that was one of the main things on our report for Fire Station 1 was finishing wrapping that northwest part of the building. We've got so much heat loss there. So that's actually 39.9, or right at close to 40,000 there instead of 35, but the only number I had was from 2011 when we had the original audit done. So I do have that hard number now as well. The other big ticket item in there, of course, is the final payment on the fire truck of $165,061. That will finish off the payment on that fire truck that will be here at July, into June, first part of July. We did sell 2 other trucks to offset that. As you see in my revenue up top, we've got $35,000 to bring in yet from Knierim, Iowa, who has purchased the old tanker truck that we've are getting rid of, and that was about a $20,000 profit compared to just trading it in to the fire equipment company. So they're upgrading, as Rex says, their 1958 truck to 1990 something. So they're really happy, and we're really happy that we could make $20,000 extra on selling it outright instead of trading it in.
Good job, done.
Yeah,
Who negotiated that deal?
I did.
Okay, good job.
Yeah, and we did that with the first one. If you look back at actual 17, that $15,000 was selling a fire truck that was worth $5.
Alta?
No, that first one was Alta, the second one was Sac City, and now this one's Knierim. So we've done it 3 trucks in a row now where we've made anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 more than what we could have on trade and just sell them outright. So.
And what's the 500% increase in training?
Training, John, I've got 21 of my 32 people now have less than 10 years on the department, which youth is good. I've had a lot of people leave, retire, as you just saw Keith Hetwer, our 3rd command, left after 37 years. So we have some classes we need to get these folks to bring them up to speed. And that's everything from firefighter 1 to medical training to confined space training and water rescue and all that stuff. I try to get as many grants as I can when I bring those classes into the department. We actually had a trench rescue class that we put on a weekend for everybody here last year. That's about a $4,000 class. I got a grant through the training fund to do that. What I want, though, is to have that money there to do these classes, so if the grants aren't coming through, we've got it and we can do these classes to get these people up to speed, because I really can't train them at an emergency. We've got to have them trained ahead of time. So it's good to have youth, just like Rich said earlier, but it takes training to get them up to where they need to be. So that probably will be up for just a couple years, and then I can drop that training money back down. We kind of do that with our vehicle maintenance fund. If you look back at 2013, under vehicle maintenance, it was almost 10 grand. Every 5 years we have to stress test our ladder trucks, and they have to have a UL test, and they go down back to the factory basically, and they get tested for about 3 days, and they check the welds and all that. So if you'll see, like this year in my actual budget, it's at 10 grand. Then next year I dropped vehicle maintenance back for the 2019 budget back to 8,500 because I don't have the ladder truck to test. So this year's a ladder truck test, so that money goes up. Same thing with training. We'll be up for a couple years, John, and then it will probably fall back down to around the $5,500 mark. And we do use some donated money to offset training sometimes too, but this year I'm really going to use that donated money more towards those items at the bottom that we've pulled out of our capital improvement to offset that stuff. Matter of fact, I sent my monthly report to you today. Assistant Chief Weiss wrote a grant. He's wrote a few now, and Farm Credit Service gave us $2,000 this morning to help offset that ventilation fan for that new truck. So we brought in $2 grand this morning based on a grant that Mike did through Farm Credit Services. So thanks to Mike for writing that up, and so we've almost got that item paid for already.
And as you and I discussed on the part-time or the full-time position, instead of running right away, I would more think like we go off before we run and do a part-time and see what kind of benefit this person would bring.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at ways to offset costs, and I'm willing to do whatever you guys would like me to do. You know, we've got a program here I think that is needed. I think it's a way to offset a cost on a person in the long run that we can use 365 days a year for whatever we need. we are on the bottom end when we do our comparisons of other cities our size for budget and staffing, full-time staffing anyway. But I think that's something we can address in a closed session later on, and go over the ifs and ands and whats, and I think we can get it accomplished, however you guys so direct.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, do you have anything that you need to address over and above him, or?
No, Mayor.
Okay, I just wanted to check, Mike, I won't leave you out. Well,
I do kind of have a question for maybe Mr. Gregg, and Chief Vandebeck, and Chief Shipper. Where's the logical regional emergency services headed that we were talking about earlier? Statewide, I mean, it's gonna be a matter of time before these little towns close up shop. It's coming, right? Just on volunteer force alone. So where's the projection being seen as far as how can we be ahead of the curve, without getting our necks out too far, but it's headed to a regional deal, isn't it?
I think you'll see it probably in the next 10 years, Clark. Some fire departments already started doing that. Your county seat or your bigger city is the one that ends up helping everybody. But that comes with a cost to those other communities and those other citizens. So right now we have, on the fire side, rural taxation money that we bring in for fire protection. Each individual city has a certain number of townships that they collect that rural money for. If we take over those areas because those little towns close, then that rural money needs to come into our city budget if we're gonna pick up that territory. Same thing, if we decide that all of a sudden 24/7 we're covering another community and they have no EMS or they have no fire, then that community needs to foot the bill to this city for covering them. So I think, in the long run, you'll see that, and, we'll have to put a plan together. I think it's probably closer than what most people think from what we've just been seeing even in Plymouth County. But sometimes those struggles are there with pride and ownership and all that kind of thing. We will help anybody because when we call, they come help us. That's the nice thing. The state has 2080 mutual aid agreements where we share resources and we mutual aid with each other, and we bill for services, some departments don't, so we try to collect funds on that. But I think in the long run, what you'll see is, you'll see a district where you might have a smaller town that has first responders. You might have one fire truck instead of 6, and the center or bigger town in the county, or a couple of the bigger towns in that county, are sending equipment to those calls, but we're also bringing in revenue to offset that, either through taking their taxation stuff or taxing or billing the cities individually. Because on our end, we're a little luckier than EMS. You have to provide fire service, it's a law. Whether you're a township or a city, you have to provide fire service, so they tax for that. So we have a revenue source there that EMS doesn't have. And I listened to Greg's talk, he's exactly right. I can go right now and say, EMS, you're essential service. That doesn't mean I have to give you a penny. Where we have that formula in place for township monies and things like that. Now on the law enforcement, and I can't answer for that, how that's gonna be something Kevin will have to deal with, if these little towns say, hey, can you cover us for police force? Because I know some other towns like Hall and Alton Hall at one time was using Sioux Center PD and Alton was using Orange City PD and got rid of their police forces.
They're not using the sheriff?
At this time, I believe it's Alton is actually using Orange City. I don't foresee Lamar's contracting out, and if we ever are asked, we're going to proceed very carefully with that.
Okay.
But right now, there's a lot of pride in ownership, like Chief Shipper says, and I don't see a law enforcement need in Plymouth County at this time with trying to contract out.
Okay. So, Greg, you?
As far as EMS goes, one big thing that we're looking into the future is the decrease in volunteerism. Right now, we have 20 volunteers, helps out a lot. I put a PowerPoint together a few months back that, just Lamar's, if we had to staff our 2 ambulances full-time, it's $660,000 extra, and we're already running on a deficit. Couple things that we are looking at, of course, for assisting Merrill, we are looking at having continuous aid. We do have mutual aid agreements with other communities in the area. One thing that just last weekend I discussed with Akron and said, we're a paramedic service, Sioux City's not providing it anymore. Let's get some paramedic assist agreements, because if I go help them and I don't transport them, but I get in and give them paramedic level service, I can't charge that patient for that.
Okay.
So it would be an agreement that I charge the service turns around and tries to get that from the patient. So that is one thing that we're working on. But right now, we're doing well with the volunteers, and I can also tell you, right now, we have 2 ambulances in Lamar's. We ran 1,048 calls last year.
Right.
Majority of them being on Unit 1. 61 of them calls were on Unit 2. We can absorb a lot of calls before we have to look at adding any big equipment.
Okay.
It's just watching the staffing.
Okay.
But I do think it's something that's down the road that we need to address now. I mean, at least have what I call a plan D in place, you know, when it does hit, because somebody's they're gonna need direction.
So Bill, did you agree with everything you just said?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Bill, I see you just walked in, do you have anything you wanna add?
No, actually, I just got back from a meeting in Sioux City.
Oh, he
because-
said ice fishing.
No.
Did you catch any?
I'm not gonna tell you what I caught. No, under the system standards, the Area 3B that we're in, they're looking right now at, actually our funding is getting cut for that area. We just found that out today.
Where is
but
Area 3B?
It's Cherokee, Woodbury, Ida, Monona, and Plymouth.
Okay.
Who's cutting, the state?
Yeah,
Is this state driven?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, they're 47 million short, Dick, you know, I mean, they could've cut us all.
I thought they'd probably find them.
Rex
But
loves that.
when I walked in, I heard the fire chief talking about, you know, they're considered an essential service. They've got a tax base to go on. There is something in the legislature this year that they're gonna try pushing through. I'm going down next week to find out more about it, but that's an option. But I really, as one senator told me, he says, when you guys respond, it's seconds. When we respond, it takes years. So it may be down the road a while. But no, I agree with, I was out when I walked in, heard Greg talk, and agreed with everything he said.
Thank you, Bill.
So, you bet.
Anybody questions for Bill?
Sounded pretty tremendous what he said, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mayor, just a comment.
Scott, does everybody done with the group here?
Hey, I just wanted to comment on that ambulance stuff.
Oh, okay.
I think it's inevitable. So I think Clark's question is inevitable at some point in the future. The communities can't afford the service. They can't find help for the service. They can't even afford to buy new equipment and keep up with the system standards. A lot of times they can't afford the training. And so I think, kind of like Dave said, a lot of times the bigger service that is within the county seat, so that defines us, really needs to step to the plate and probably figure out a way to expand our ability to cover those other areas. I don't have any answers as far as how to make that happen, and but I think it needs to be studied because I truly believe it's absolutely inevitable that communities will start falling off the grid as far as furnishing the service. You know, a couple that we're already aware of is Owens and Merrill, and really I think we could almost include Remsen in that category. So I really think we need to start studying it
what Scott's saying, but also on a positive note that's happening, just recently, Hinton bought a second ambulance. They had an incident where they went into Merrill's territory, came up to Floyd Valley. In the meantime, some school kid got hit by a car. They had to wait about 11 to 15 minutes for an ambulance to get down there, which Hinton came from Lamar's down. Otherwise, it was Lamar's, Kingsley, or Akron. So they went out, they got a decent number of EMTs on staff. Matter of fact, during that incident, they had, I think, 8 EMTs on scene. They just didn't have an ambulance to transport. So they went out and bought another ambulance, because now with Siouxland paramedics closing, Sioux City Fire will not come across the county line to assist. So that's a positive move, and they've got the people to handle 2 ambulances.
But Bill, the other big thing is you and I were talking about on this, what's category is the area very short in on your steps up? You know, you got your EMT and
We've got the EMT, the advanced EMT, and the paramedic.
paramedic. Is that the one that they're short on all over?
You mean for Plymouth County?
As far as transporting and things?
Well, EMTs, advanced EMTs, and paramedics can all transport.
Okay.
The paramedic is the advanced
The
provider.
paramedic.
Right,
In other words, if you get a call and there's no paramedic out of that town or whatever it is, that's what they gotta go for.
Right.
And they gotta wait, right?
right. There's a safety net with having a paramedic on. I'm gonna use Akron, for example. If they have a critical patient and they're going to Sioux City, they used to have Siouxland paramedics that would meet them halfway and then jump in and transport with them. That's no longer available. So they're gonna have to either, one, go to a nearby hospital, let's say Hayward, get air up there and then transport them, or they just go directly to Sioux City. But there's a gap over in the western part of the county that does not have the advanced life support.
I guess the reason I originally asked the question, and I concur totally with what Scott said, that's exactly what I'm getting at, is I think we need to be looking 4, 5, 6 years down the road and go, how are we preparing for mainly our your staff, ambulances and fire, to be looking at more of a regional system, because it's coming.
Right, our area is gonna be getting bigger. As that happens, we may have to redraw the line, so Hinton may be taking up more of the district of Merrill, us, Merrill, and Hinton. We may have to divide that up so it's, the response time's quicker.
Right, but that doesn't help us northeast and northwest.
Correct.
Northeast and northwest, I mean.
That's another scenario we'd
So
have
that's
to.
a whole other scenario, so we still have a regional situation. And
Right.
My whole point is, if we're making improvements to our departments, then we need to be thinking that way.
Correct.
So, okay, that's all I'm getting at.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Okay.
But the other thing is, and I don't mean to be greedy, but the other thing I think you need to consider or take a look at down the road is I think Lamar's is gonna be looked at very hard, but we also gotta get paid for it. I mean, we need some revenue coming in to offset that.
Right, absolutely.
If we're willing to do it, you see what I mean?
Right, correct. No, I understand.
And I think that's something.
So by next Tuesday's city council meeting, we're gonna have the 3 Musketeers, Scott Langle, Bev Langle, and Jason McCura come up with a potential list of adjustments to the budget. More than the 291,000 to get us to 0, because we're not gonna like all the numbers you adjust.
Plus, we've got salaries that are gonna change, and that's gonna be a negative on that number, so.
Right, but I mean, they can come up with,
Salaries are in there.
There's 2%.
Yeah, but at 2%.
Oh, yeah, okay,
But
yeah.
we're gonna.
well, who said that we were gonna give them more than 2%?
Yeah, I'm not.
So, we gotta start somewhere, right?
I agree.
But I'm thinking those 3 people have their hands on it, they've heard us, come up with a list. If their list can come up with, let's just say 400,000 of potential cuts, or potential adjustments, or potential changes, we could sit there and some of it may be some transfers or some, maybe we don't get to 75 days, we get to 70 days or something like that. But put those in a list and then we'll address them on Tuesday as a discussion item, right? Because we don't need it as an action item, we just need to argue about them as a discussion item. And
if we can't agree, we'll call Dick up on the phone and he'll have to come home and help us negotiate.
Catch the red eye.
I'm off duty. Yeah, red eye. I've phoned,
Anybody got a problem with that?
No,
And if anybody's got suggestions for cuts, send them to these guys.
I do wanna give, Jason, after all we've talked about here, and, do you have anything you wanna add to it as far as all the efforts that you put in?
No, I was just gonna ask him, Rex just said it, what do you expect by the council meeting, so I think that's covered.
Okay.
he said he said 400, right?
He did say 400. Bev, do you
That
have
doesn't mean he
anything
will
that
do it,
that you wanna?
You gave him a nice number.
Okay. And in conclusion, Scott, comments to wind this up? Scott?
Still there, Scott?
Oops, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I do have some concluding thoughts.
Okay.
I do agree with Rex's 400,000 as compared to the 281. We got to look for more than just that. And I also failed to mention in my opening remarks that the enterprise fund in water is in that $400,000 negative, roughly 394 on page 2. We need to look to resolve that so that all funds, the total of all funds, I would like to see a positive number instead of a negative deficit position of 510,000. So I think we need to look at that. Some of the areas that I'm going to look at, unless the council does not want us to look in these avenues, would be splitting things between years, kind of like we talked about the water tower. Also splitting equipment costs between years.